Morgan is the CEO of Blavity. She's a serial startup entrepreneur passionate about building technology at the intersection of creativity and culture. She's grown Blavity to be one of the fastest growing digital media startups and a top destination for Black youth culture. She is one of only 12 Black women to raise over $1 million in venture funding. She will be interviewed by the wonderful COO of CMX, Carrie Jones. Please give a big CMX welcome to Morgan.
I know that that's mostly for you, but it feels really good.
I love it. I love it.
So I am so excited to interview you today. When Erica offered this opportunity for me to do this fireside chat with you, I started immersing myself in your work, and I've been floored by what you've been able to do in 3+ years. Is that right? Just a little bit over 3 years.
Yeah.
The awards you've won, the growth you've seen in your community, and the vastness of the vision that you've created with Blavity. But when I really knew that you were a role model to everyone here is actually, I don't know if you remember this, but when we did our prep call for this, you were on a team retreat.
Oh, yeah.
And you took our call from Chipotle. And that's when I was like, oh, she's just like the rest of us. Like, we just want to eat lunch and build community. Like, that's what we want to do.
Yes.
So we don't have a ton of time here. I want to dive in. I have kind of a hardball question for you right off the bat. So,
ready.
When you go to Chipotle, do you get the burrito bowl or do you get like straight up burrito?
I get the burrito bowl, but I add guac.
Ooh, good choice, good choice. Gotta get the avocado. We all know.
You know,
Yeah.
trade-off.
So, I mean, how many people here know what Blabbity is? Good number of you.
Okay, pretty good.
So, yeah, for those of you who don't know, do you want to explain in your own words?
Yeah, so Blavity is a lot of things. We're mostly a community and media company for Black millennials currently in the United States. So we have a variety of brands, Blavity, which is our main brand for news, politics, and then 2190, which is a new brand we launched just for Black women, focusing on health and wellness. We have a tech conference called Afrotech to focus on the Black tech experience and startup founders and venture funding. We have recently acquired 2 other brands focusing on the Black community. One's called Shadow and Act, which focuses on Hollywood and entertainment and a lot of the storytellers that we have that are doing amazing things with HBO and Showtime and what shows are getting picked up, what movies are happening. And then Travel Noir, which is the one we announced on Monday, which is one of the largest Black travel brands, has a huge, amazing Instagram following. So yeah, it's been a busy 3 years.
Yeah. So Monday you were like announcing this huge acquisition.
Yeah.
It's so exciting. Congrats.
Thank you.
So you've said in the past, I think this was in 2014 actually, that articulating the vision for this huge thing that's grown so much was your main challenge from those early stages.
Right.
Do you think that's still the case, articulating that vision and story?
Yeah, I think that, you know, when it comes to building something for a specific audience, people tend to say like, okay, well, how can you get that at scale? Like, you've got it's Black people, but you want like young Black people. It's a segment of a segment of a segment, right? So how are you going to become something huge? How are you going to make an impact when maybe your target audience is really at scale 14 million people, maybe, right? And so I think it was difficult for people to understand how impactful a small group of people can be, despite the fact that, particularly in Black culture, we influence so much of what's going on TV, sports, music, fashion, everything. And so it definitely was a struggle in the beginning, being like, well, you know, what do you listen to? What do you watch? Well, there might be someone Black on that, probably, statistically speaking. You know, now, of course, it's a little bit easier for people to see. And we've had a few interesting things happen in the last 3 years where we have, you know, case studies where we can say, look, because a small group of powerful people in New York or LA have come together and said something on Twitter, on Instagram, it starts a movement, it starts to influence, and you can see the ripple effect across culture or online. I mean, it's very trackable.
Yeah. So in the early stages, it's not necessarily about quantity, it's about like depth.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the influence that those people can have.
Right.
Yeah. So I know that's mostly VCs, right, that you were having to explain that to. So,
Yes.
so I mean, I draw a parallel between that and having to explain your story internally at a company all the time. Like, what is this big thing that I'm building? Yeah. So pre-VC money, I know that you were building this with your own money and using volunteers and just talented people in the community that you would find. Can you kind of walk us through from the very beginning to where you are today with the community?
Yeah, so Blabbity started like many things as a newsletter. So MailChimp, MVP. And so we started just curating content. We started curating videos, curating stories, and we were sending a weekly newsletter that was, your top 10 things you needed to know. And as that kind of grew, we then said, okay, well, maybe we should make the website. Instead of linking to YouTube or other people's content, now we're going to link to our content. We're going to build a website that's focused on video. Again, this was 3 years ago, so this is when like Upworthy was happening and BuzzFeed and everything was going on Facebook, and I was like, we could do this.
Yeah.
And so we built the website
on WordPress.
On WordPress, right? Yeah, absolutely. Like over. Oh no, not WordPress yet. We actually built one of my co-founders is an engineer, and so he built like a custom.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, like the whole thing. Took us 2 months. So built the website, launched it. Nobody clicked. Nobody cared. People were like, I'm in the newsletter. This is where I want to stay. I don't want to go somewhere else. And I definitely don't want to go to this website that like is not part of my habits. If I'm going to go somewhere, I want to go to YouTube, I want to go to Twitter, I want to go Facebook, like places that I'm comfortable. So first thing was I said, okay, well maybe it's ugly. It's just not pretty enough. So I spent another month making it really pretty.
I've been there.
Yeah, I feel like we've all been there, right? Like it's just not pretty enough. So made that change, updated it. Nobody cared. People still weren't clicking, people still weren't staying, they weren't sharing. And the metric of success for us was shares. It was engagement, it was tweets, people looking at the website and then sharing it with someone else. So then I said, okay, this isn't working. Let's start to figure out who our most loyal people are. Right? Let's look and actually just, instead of looking at the 10,000 people in the email newsletter, let's look at the people who open it every single day as soon as it's sent. And then let's write stories and reach out to them as creators and influencers and think about how, and they weren't influencers by, 100,000. They were they have 5,000, Instagram followers or whatever it may be.
They're like before the cusp.
Yeah, right, like
cusp.
pre-micro influencers. And so we reached out to them, and then we started writing stories about them. And so it was like blabbity.com/blog, right? Just to drive traffic to the website. And that blog did so much better than the custom, video conglomerating thing that we made. And that was what was on WordPress. And so just looking at the data, and I think that's something that's so important when you're building for a really small audience in the beginning, you need to be obsessive about tracking the data and knowing what people are engaging in. So we then said, okay, we'll write a blog, we'll make a blog. And continue to feature people in our community, share their stories, which of course has a viral effect because then they're sharing it on and building their community. And also, I think, added a sense of legitimacy that Blavity was intentional about being for other people and being a platform and a space for other people to share their stories as opposed to it being about us telling people what they need to know. And from there, it went crazy from there. And I was like, well, okay. We're changing the blog to the video site and we're switching it. So blabbity.com became the blog, and then we did video.blabbity.com, which of course died because nobody cared, which is fine. I think that's one of the things that's so important about what we do as creators. You build something, you fail, you build something again, you fail, but you just have to be, I'm agnostic about how we serve this community. Whether it's a conference, it's a newsletter, it's an Instagram handle or a Twitter handle, doesn't matter, right? What I care about is building something that is meaningful for the specific group of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how many users do you actually have today? Can you share that information?
Yeah, today it's probably around 5 million unique visitors across a couple of websites, and then
Is that per month or like?
per month, yes. And then across the whole network, it's probably around 50 million now, because we have a nice international audience, which was a unintended but beautiful thing that's happened. And then of course, knowing about Black culture, it continues to grow outside of just Black people, which is great.
Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned is that you need to be trying new things and be agnostic about how you serve and how you create value for your members. How do you go about deciding what to test and deciding if it's successful or not, so that you can go on and launch these sub-sites, which is what you've been really successful at doing?
Yeah, so we test a lot of things. I'll tell you guys about one that we tested that hasn't worked. So we had this idea, we looked at Instagram and we said, okay, what are the most exciting things on Instagram that grow the fastest, right? So you've got travel, food, fashion, beauty, and then just like individual people like the Kim Kardashians of the world. I don't know if we have like a no Kim K rule.
No.
Okay. Sure. Sometimes we do that at conferences, So one of the things I was like, okay, travel, that's already taken care of with Travel Noir. This was 2 years ago. Food. I was like, Black people like to eat. We got a lot of food. But when you look at all the food accounts, there's no Black people in any of the food accounts. There's no hands of Black people just holding the burger, the ice cream, like all that stuff. So I was like, okay, great, well, let's try it. Let's try, it's literally Blavity Foodie, you could look it up. And so we just started like, curating photos of Black people with food. And it sounds silly, but like it's really meaningful for people, because if you are a foodie and you are a chef, you're like, yeah, this is my life, this is my identity, like this is something that emotionally drives me. And so it was really refreshing, I think, for that community to see themselves reflected. And so, then they're sharing, they're using the hashtag, it's growing, but it hit a ceiling. It wasn't big enough of a community. It was too much of a niche within a niche. So we left the account up. It just, people can use the hashtag, and then we have a virtual assistant who then posts the photos. But other than that, we don't put a lot of resources into it. But I'm not going to kill it. Yeah. Just kind of let it go.
Because it works, but it's just not.
It's fine. Yeah, it makes people happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So I know at CMX, we're constantly like doing this balancing act between like, do we grow larger and try to like expand who we appeal to, or do we go deeper and, like you said, take the top engaged people and serve them even more? Like, how do you think about that balance with Blavity?
Yeah, it's something that I think we have to fight every day for. We prioritize deeper engagement. We prioritize being a part of someone's life in so many different ways. I'd rather someone interact with something that Blavity has created for them at least once a day than have like 10 people once a week, right? I think it's more meaningful to be really close to someone's life and help them and provide value. So I think the challenge is that many times when we work with advertisers or venture capitalists, they want scale. They want all of these things. And I'm like, that's not what we're going for. We're never going to be BuzzFeed. And so figuring out how to tell that story, and I think, probably for many of you working inside large companies and think about your stakeholders, it's the same discussion. It's like, well, we could work with these people, or we could go bigger. Let's go bigger. No, that's not always the right answer. And so what we've had to do, I think, was move a little bit slower than other people may have liked, because we've said, look, we're going to build this community in a way that I'm going to go deep instead of going wide. And then when talking to advertisers, and they're like, well, we need 10 million impressions. I'm like, you're not going to get 10 million impressions, right? But you might get 10 million comments, engagements, right? And helping people understand that, like, the value in people actually engaging.
And as the leader of this, you have to be explaining that
all the time. Always telling that story. And I think having those case studies, having things that you can point to, and that's the beauty of social, right? I mean, it's like, click the link. You too can see the comments, right? And compare it and really draw it out for people. I think that's been important for us.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is fascinating that you've done is built this community of influencers that's like 700 influencers that you interface with. I mean, that's something that so many of us want to do, is appeal to influencers and work with them because they're influential.
Right.
Who knew?
Right.
So, I mean, why did you decide to go that route?
Yeah. So we have this group we call them the Creative Society. No one wants to be called an influencer. They want to, so like, we gotta stop saying it. We call them creators because that's really what they are. They happen to make money being themselves, but they're creatives. Some people, so we have a Slack group for them. And one of the things that we did was really think about how can we serve this group of people. And so for our creators, we think about, okay, what do they care about? Well, they care about making money, right? That's really what influencers, they care about making money, is the bottom line. So how can I help our community of creators make more money? I can teach them how to price themselves. I can teach them how to work with advertisers. I can bring them advertisers. I can give them more followers, which ultimately brings them more money by featuring them, by working and collaborating with them. And so when we think about how do I serve them specifically, then it becomes a much more interesting conversation because then they start bringing things to us. They bring things to us first because they view Blavity as a partner, as an advocate for them. And so what we started with was, like I mentioned, telling the stories for them on the blog and featuring them.
So they're the same people as those.
So those were the initials. Those were the initial people. And they just kept coming back. We're like, okay, well, we should put some structure around this because I can't post every single music video, but maybe a few. So the next thing that we did after we kind of had that, it was an email. We had a separate email list for them, but then they weren't communicating with each other. And that was actually now is the most important thing to all of them. We say, what's the most value that you get from being in the Creative Society? It's actually the collaborations. They're like, oh my God, I've been wanting to meet this person, or I've been trying to get in touch with them. I see them in here, and they can just send them a DM. And then they make this awesome magic, which has residual effects for us because we can then get access again to that magic first. So the way we run it, we have a full-time person who works on the Creative Society. We do weekly webinars and AMAs. And the AMAs are done by other people in the Slack group. So again, it gives them more of an excuse to talk to each other because they're like, oh, you were the speaker. So like you can, it's an excuse. People just need an excuse to connect with each other. And then we also bring them deals. So every month we say, here are the opportunities, here are the clients that we're working on or working with, and here's the projects that we're working on. Do any of you guys want to be involved? So that just kind of keeps the funnel going.
And do you manage that, or do you have like a community manager that manages that?
Yeah, I have a community manager.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, she's amazing. Marissa, I think she actually does the best job because she's invited to like all the parties, all the openings, the screenings. I'm like, where are you going? Like, I want to go.
Just doing our job.
Yes, right.
So now that Blavity is as successful as it is, and you're growing, and you acquired another company on Monday, what's next?
That's a great question. I think right now we're definitely going to focus on building. So I think there's a lot of people who know about Blavity and maybe know about one of our brands, but don't know about the whole ecosystem. And so thinking about, say you're a Black millennial in New York, right? You're like sitting in Brooklyn, you maybe work at like, I don't know, Target corporate during the day, but you're a poet deep down inside, and you eat avocados and all those things, right? That's like our user persona. And like literally. And so let's say you're that person. So you're going to work, you're sitting in your cubicle. What do? First thing in the morning is you're checking for news. Well, we have a daily newsletter that goes out to like 100,000 people. It's kind of like The Skim, but like for Black people and funny. And so you guys should all be on it. It's actually really good. And so you're on the train. You're opening up the newsletter, you're like, okay, I'm woke, I got it. You go to the cubicle, sitting there, you're working. What do most people do? They have Instagram, right? They're checking their phone. We send you a meme, right? Because you're checking Blavity's, one of your feeds is Blavity. Or you're thinking about, oh, what should I eat? What should I eat today? And something from 2190, our women's brand, pops up, right? So there's multiple ways that we can interact with people throughout the day. Let's say you go home and you're like, what should I watch on Netflix? And you look on Facebook and you see an article from Shadow and Act about here are the things that you need to be watching on Netflix this week, or that's leaving Netflix this month. And then I hit you with an ad to buy a conference ticket. But you know, basically what I'm saying is that there's lots of different ways that we can interact with people, and so thinking about how do we continue to expand that throughout and cross our communities over with each other, because they aren't all the same person, but they all fall in the same demographic.
Yeah, so it's really about getting people to engage across multiple touch points. If we want to get lingo-y,
Yes, yes.
So just what I find fascinating about what you're doing, and this has kind of been the way that the media industry in general has been moving over the last, 5 years especially, is toward like this decentralization of who creates the narrative for us, who creates the news. What do you think about your role in that and the future there?
Yeah, I think it's so amazing. Like I see Greatest, I see like Well and Good. There's so many amazing platforms and like brands that have been intentional about making things for a specific audience. And I think that the more that we can continue to do that, the more that I think people will not feel like we're stereotyped by the media, right? Oftentimes it's just go to the center, because that's the easiest thing to do. That's the path of least resistance. For me, I think Blavity's role, my role, is to continue to build platforms for other people. And one of the things that we're focusing on the technology side is actually inviting our audience. So one of the things I didn't mention is that most of our content, so about 50% of our content is user generated. So we have a platform where you can click post, and then you can go to a word processor, just like Medium, and share your story. And it goes through a curation process. But I think that has helped us grow a lot, because again, people are seeing their content released, they're getting featured, and it kind of continues to start the engine. Not all of our platforms have that yet. And so thinking about how do we scale that across different platforms, what does it look like for a video or a web series producer? How is that different than somebody writing an essay about Beyonce's twins, right? Those are different types of people, but ultimately the technology underneath it could be the same.
Yeah, that's super exciting.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Well, I think what you're doing is absolutely amazing, and you are available on Twitter for questions from anybody after the fact, and thank you so much for sharing your story with CMX.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it.